Thank you all for coming this afternoon. I'm very pleased with the turnout. I'm Greg Priddy, Senior Fellow here at the Center for National Interest. And we're going to be talking this morning about Iran. One of our panelists is on his way over, he's just running a bit late, but he's going to be here. But in the aftermath of the violent suppression of protests in January and amid discussions of possible U.S. and Israeli military action, what are the prospects for a negotiated deal with Trump? What are the prospects for fundamental political change in Iran, both in the short term and the long term, both related to that question and apart from that question? And what are the drivers of elite fracture that could undermine the repressive power of the regime? What would a divided opposition coalesce around an alternative? What role, if any, does Reza Pahlavi play? And would U.S. military intervention actually weaken the regime, or might it somehow strengthen the regime or cause a negative outcome? We have two distinguished speakers with us here this morning, who I'll briefly introduce. Sina Zodi, who's on his way over, will be here in about 10 or 15 minutes. He's assistant professor of Middle East politics at George Washington University. He's a frequent commentator on Iranian affairs in both English language and Persian language media. He's the author of a forthcoming book, Iran and the Bomb, the United States, Iran, and the Nuclear Question. Alex Tatanka is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute, specializing in Middle East regional security with particular focus on Iran. Born in Tehran, he is the author of The Battle of the Ayatollahs in Iran, United States Foreign Policy and Political Rivalry since 1979. Iran and Pakistan, Security, Diplomacy, and American Influence. And he's currently working on his third book, Grand Contest, The Rivalry of Iran, America, and Israel in the Arab World. Each of our speakers will give a brief overview, and as I mentioned, Sina should be here shortly, and then we'll open up for an extended Q&A. It'll be an interesting discussion. We have a number of people here among our guests who are affiliated with various stakeholders in these issues. Alex, you can go first.
Sure. Thank you, Greg. It's good to see everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I really haven't prepared any remarks given the meeting yesterday. I thought, who knows where we're going to be today. But I give you my sort of take on where Iran is in terms of domestic situation. That's what I focus on the most. Some of you are much more closely watching what's going on in terms of negotiations. Ambassador, good to see you. So yeah, looking at the Iranian political scene, I think clearly they want to have a deal. I have no doubt about that. I think Ali Khamenei has gone against his own wishes. We all remember he said famously, if there's ever going to be a day where we negotiate with the Americans, he said, it might happen, but I can assure you this, it will never happen with that man, pointing to in the direction of Donald Trump. And here we are. The Iranians are talking to Donald Trump, and that gives you a sense of how things are in Tehran. They have to negotiate. They are not in a good position. People compare this moment to the period leading up to 2015. I think Iran is in a much worse, and I think most of you would agree, if not all of you, in a much worse position than 2015 or prior to 2015. Much weaker, both domestically in terms of the state of the economy and where Iran sits internationally. So overall, the mood in Iran is, if we can cut a deal with the American president, who they like to think is as transactional that they initially thought he would be. They always thought of Donald Trump as a transactional leader, going back to his election for the first term. Always thought, he's different. We can cut a deal. He's not going to come and bother us about human rights and what we do internally. He's going to focus on what we can give him in terms of what American core national interest is, and that's fine. But if we know Trump turned out to be not so just transactional. The maximum pressure happened. The assassination of Qasem Soleimani happened. The 12-day war happened. So they are far more skeptical about Trump than they were initially. But yet there is this hope that they might be able to cut a deal with him. Now, where the regime is at right now, if you want to narrow it down to the three issues, clearly, and all of us have seen in the press, there is that potential for a deal limited to the nuclear aspect in terms of how much they enrich, what they potentially ship out. If they don't ship it out, who's going to inspect it inside? Those types of things, I think, are pretty much at this point open for discussion. I think the Iranians might surprise in terms of how they're willing to compromise on the nuclear front than this sort of rhetoric out of Tehran might suggest. On the missiles, That's the other end of the spectrum. I really don't see them making any concessions on the missiles. I think that obviously might have been the core issue for Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday. It's not so much that you put a cap on the range of these missiles, the number of these missiles. What I think that would have been more hopeful, which some press is suggesting, Greg and I were just talking about it, intentions behind these missiles. So maybe if you can shift the conversation away about the capabilities in terms of the production lines and start talking about something that looks like political dialogue, confidence building, not just with the United States, but presumably indirectly with the Israelis, to get the Israelis to maybe lessen the pressure on Trump as he's entertaining the idea of cutting a new deal with the Iranians. Last point I make about the proxies, because I think you, Greg, want to talk about on this anniversary of the Islamic Republic, 47 years birthday of the Islamic Republic, maybe it's worth talking about what's happening inside the country. But on the proxies, I noticed that Ali Rajani was just in Oman. He visited Doha, met officials from the Houthi movement, the Houthis, met with Hamas officials in Doha. What was that all about? I don't read too much into it. Again, I love to learn from those of you in the room who follow that track much more. I don't necessarily think this is a suggestion to Washington that we are not going to walk away from the axis of resistance. The proxies are here to stay. We'll support them in any way I can. Even if that is Iran's position, the reality is in material terms, there's not a lot Iran can do for these proxies and vice versa. So again, we're in a very different place when it comes to the use of the proxy network. If they ever made sense strategically, you could say when Qasem Soleimani was around and it made sense at some point, certainly when they were having the upper hand in places like Syria. That's not where we are today. And I think that is pretty much the consensus in Iran. So I think we are in a way at a juncture, a turning point where the leadership in Iran seems very much hesitant in terms of doubling down on the proxies. And if the United States, unlike 2015, focuses on that issue, comes up with creative ideas of pushing the Iranians further away from using the proxies, which will go a long way of satisfying the likes of Israel and the hawks, if you will, in Washington, then the US should do that. This is a moment where you want to press the Iranians on the proxy network. Because as I said, the cost-benefit analysis has changed. They're not really delivering for Iran. Iran now needs to focus on the narrow issue of, one, prevent war, if they can get some sanctions relief. And again, in Tehran, they're not sitting there thinking there's going to be massive amounts of money going Iran's way. This is not 2015. European executives are not going to rush to Tehran tomorrow if there's a deal. This is really about preventing war, and then they need to figure out what to do next, because they haven't thought about that. And that's the thing with Islamic Republic. I keep saying this in Persian language media that I do, which I know the Iranians watch. I keep saying you're not looking at this as a strategic opportunity. This is a moment for you to really go in a different direction. This is for you a moment to sort of say the last 20 plus years of what Iran has done in the region really hasn't brought the sort of security Iran wanted, certainly not in terms of security terms, and I would say in terms of economics has been a drain on Iran, on the Iranian national interest. Again, what I'm telling you is widely accepted in mainstream Iranian discourse. It's just the regime at the very top needs to come out and pretty much accept this in their open recognition. So I think the strategic opportunity is there. Trump might be someone probably better than any other president in recent memory that they can cut a deal with. They need to come up with something that is easy for Donald J. Trump to lift up and say, I won. I got a better deal than Obama. And that, again, I've been saying this for a couple of years now. This is not Trump's job. This is Iran's job. They are the ones who need to come up with something that Trump can easily lift and say, I won. I am better than Obama in 2015. It could be something, again, referring to press, something that will last only the duration of what's left of the second Trump presidency, 3 years, but that might just be good enough for President Trump. Because it seems to me, and I know potential second aircraft carrier is going to go to the region. Overall, when you look at the numbers, this occupation of Iran is not going to happen. And there's a big question mark of if there is airstrikes going on, how long they're going to be going on for. Is it going to be enough to bring the regime down? I'm on the skeptical side. Again, and I'll stop here. You did say be, long-winded.
Shifted a little bit since we're waiting for
Right,
CBC.
yeah. So one last comment, long-winded. But if the United States had a strategy on Iran that was beyond 3 years. And I have a big question mark if the US has that. But you don't want to necessarily, if you want to cut a deal, save this regime for good. Ali Khamenei's time is up. What happened on 8th and 9th of January has made up the mind of the Iranian nation. This man and everything he stands for is not going to be tolerated for much longer. He's 86. He might go sooner. But this is, I would, again, I'm not in the business of providing policy suggestions, but you want to maybe cut a deal that deals with the urgency of the nuclear issue without helping the regime survive. Then you kind of have to start thinking along the lines of, okay, well, the country's ripe for change. How do we bring that about? Now, we know there's dissent inside the regime. And I'm not going to go out there and suggest for a second that too much investment should be made in the diaspora opposition, but nor would I say you should dismiss the diaspora opposition. And some of them will be speaking in hours in Munich Security Conference or whenever it is soon. If you could, as the United States, and we have an article, a colleague of mine coming out on this, help the Iranian opposition that's outside, that's free to articulate what it wants in terms of a vision for a free post-Khamenei Iran, help them link them up with the grand opposition that we know exists inside of Iran. Again, this mass killing that just happened, at the minimum, they're talking 7,000, probably higher. This is unprecedented in Iranian history. And Khamenei's not going to come out of this looking good. And he can call all these people Mossad agents, CIA agents, all he wants. That's not something the Iranian nation is going to buy into. So there is this sort of issue for the United States as far as policy is concerned. How do we maybe cut a deal to deal with the urgent issue of the nuclear matter, maybe the missiles, maybe even the proxies, but without throwing a lifeline that will keep this regime beyond Ali Khamenei? And that means you got to be very careful in terms of what sanctions you give him, sanctions relief you give him. And at the same time, you need to start creating that alternative, post-Ali Khamenei alternative, that frankly right now doesn't exist. There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of energy, but you need to create the platform that is convincing, because what you need, the key word is defections from inside the ranks of the regime. You mentioned Reza Pahlavi. As much as I have time for him, all the rest of it, Reza Pahlavi is not going to be doing what Ayatollah Khomeini did back 47 years ago and fly in and take over. I doubt it. I wouldn't put money on it. He could if the fertile ground was, or the ground was prepared for it, and then he could go in and be that transition leader that he used to speak of himself as. But we're not there yet. But again, we talked about elite fracture. Elite fracture can be expedited if those folks in the regime that know that this ship is sinking and the pathway to something else becomes visible, then you're much more likely to encourage the defection, which is key, as opposed to where we are right now, where a lot of people are on the fence in limbo, not sure if it's worth jumping off this ship. Let me stop there.
Do you think strikes would push in the opposite direction in terms of pulling people rally around the flag effect?
I used to tended to say, when you have a foreign power killing any Iranian, that's not good for the idea of political reform. To be honest, after what the regime just did to its own people, I sense very clearly, I see that a lot of Iranians are openly saying, kill him, kill the IRGC, kill the Basij, kill whoever that's part of this regime. We're not going to stop you, because that's the level of animosity this regime, with its own actions, has created against itself.
So since we're waiting on our second speaker, I'll go ahead and open the floor for a few questions while we wait for that.
Michael Gordon, Wall Street Journal. What is this? It's probably hard to discern from the outside, but what is the relationship between the protests and President Trump's unfulfilled promise that help is on the way? Is it having a tangible effect on encouraging the protests? Is it an ancillary influence? And what would it be going forward?
I mean, look, I think clearly a lot of people were left disappointed in terms of the lack of action when they thought, when they thought what the president had articulated was a forceful intervention, and it never came. And he obviously, as we know, he looked for ways to kind of put the right optics on it, said, they didn't hang those 800 or so people. And again, overall, left a lot of people with a bad taste in their mouths. Was not a surprise. But I would say Trump's intervention would have been a question mark in terms of what I was referring to earlier, the defection from the ranks of the regime. The street was ready and was out. And by the way, that was probably more almost to do with the call that came from Reza Pahlavi, as opposed to anything that Trump said. Reza Pahlavi this time around, again, I don't know where people stand on Reza Pahlavi, but he certainly is more of a name and a force this round than we've seen in previous rounds in recent decade plus. So I wouldn't say President Trump was key in terms of obviously how the protests erupted. I don't think he was key in shaping where the protests were going. But had he done anything different in terms of intervention, more forceful, I'm not even sure more forceful rhetoric would have done something kinetic that would have maybe convinced people to stay in the streets. But look, the reason why the regime came and killed the way they did was to put the fear of God in everyone, and they did that. So I'm not sure in that context of the regime unleashing everything he had, machine gunning literally people from backup pickup trucks, what Trump's intervention in terms of words alone would have meant. But had he taken action, like people like Senator Graham were asking for, maybe that would have had maybe that would have an influence on the ground. But I mean, I've been saying this for the last few days. When people think President Trump's going to be the one who's going to rescue this movement, I think we're missing the point. This is very much an internal Iranian affair. But again, last point: the defections. If Trump could help make the mind of many inside the rank and file inside the regime who think maybe it's time to rethink their future. If Trump could have had found ways to encourage defections essentially from the regime, and I don't think he did, that might have played a big role in pushing the protest movement's agenda forward.
Do you think there were 8?
I can only tell you that the regime says this is a number that was made up in Washington. I don't know. But then again, the regime clearly felt the need to go out and kill in a way that was, I mean, they didn't mind about the optics. This is the thing. In fact, they wanted to show how ruthless they were. They haven't denounced some of the numbers that have been out there in terms of tens of thousands of killed. They could come out and say this is a lie. They've said it a few times, but overall they let these numbers float. Why? Because they actually think it works in their favor. Because right now they want society to be scared of them. They don't care about the reputational cost and all the rest of it. It's about survival. And these people literally have reasons to be scared because, you know, if Iran enters into anything that we've seen elsewhere in the region, like Syria, chaos and so on, there will be a lot of bloodshedding, revenge going on. I mean, families have lost a lot of their young ones, and there will be revenge going on. So the regime has reason to want to be feared at this moment in order to, I guess, survive.
I think we had a couple of other questions in the back. I'm gonna switch over to Sina, and then we'll come back to Q&A right after that. So if you could just give your introductory remarks for
Sure. Well, first of all, I apologize for being late. I can only blame the Prime Minister's trip and the road closures for it. So I apologize for it. Look, in terms of what happened, I agree with most of what Alex said, that they wanted to create fear. They were not concerned with the optics. They, as some people have called it, they have the stamp of God in their hands. They can kill. They're not concerned with Washington thinks. This is the opposite of what the Shah did in 1978, 1979. He was concerned with the arms deals, what President Carter says, what human rights organizations think and say in DC, what the US media says. But these guys are the opposite of it. They don't care. And if somebody says something in DC, if President Trump says something or US officials say something in support of a protest, they turn it around. They use it against the people on the streets. And namely, I do want to point out what the former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said, falsely suggesting that Mossad agents were walking along the Iranian people on the streets. And the Iranian foreign minister took a screenshot of it, posted on X that we are actually fighting foreign agents and not the people on the streets. They call them terrorists, etc., etc. Now, why they survived? I think absolutely it was because of the violence, even for the standards of the Islamic Republic. I don't think I had seen anything like this before. And secondly, when Reza Pahlavi comes in, I say this as someone My grandparents served in the court of the Shah. My grandmother was very close to Empress Farah. I am someone who used to support Reza Pahlavi. I thought he genuinely cares about democracy and human rights in Iran. But I think that I know that I'm wrong. I think that the positions that he has taken, asking his supporters to purge the so-called reformist journalists from the media, the positions that he has taken since June 2025, the conflict with Israel, his refusal to condemn the killing of civilians in Iran during the conflict. I think that those actions, those statements, changed my opinion of him. He is not a unifying factor, and the people who are around him. And again, I speak as someone who has met him many times. He told me that he wants to be connected to the younger generation of Iranians, but I think that the people who are around him are extremely dangerous. Their mindset, they're openly xenophobic, they're Islamophobic, whatever you like to call them. They are not people who you can trust them, trust the country with them. Some of the statements by his supporters in the media that once the regime change, we're going to come after you and we're going to hang you is not going to help with security forces that are potentially thinking of defection. Reza Pahlavi claimed on TV that 50,000 security forces, law enforcement, military, have given him their allegiance. Of those 50,000 security forces, not a single showed up or stayed at least at home and to refuse to shoot at the people. So I don't take him seriously. Yes, a lot of people, because of this rosy picture that media has depicted from the Shah's time, a lot of people are saying, well, the Shah was a dictator, that's fine, but we had a lot of, many good things. So let's bring the Pahlavi back. I don't think he's concerned with democracy. I don't think, I just think that he wants a reimposition from the top and not a revolution from the bottom. That's what he wants. This is why I think he's trying to be very close to members of Congress, foreign actors, etc., etc. That's why I think he is not a unifying factor. That's what I think. So very briefly.
So we'll come back to some of the questions, and then I have a few questions as well. But I think Mark Katz had one in the back.
Thank you very much. Alex, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about repeatedly the possibility of defections from the regime. Certainly with regard to almost any revolution, this is the key factor. It's not so much the actions of the opposition, but do you have key defections? Now, I'm just sort of wondering, I can't see the IRGC defecting. Maybe I'm wrong. But what about the regular army? Is there any possibility you see within that organization? In other words, who would have to defect to bring about regime change? And is that at all conceivable? And it maybe just internal dynamics affect this, but could foreign actors such as the Trump administration play any kind of role?
So, Mark, thank you for that. What I was trying to say is that, you have a regime 47 years in power that has brought the country to this disastrous point. This isn't just recognized outside, this is recognized inside. You know that, there are open discussions in Iranian media whenever internet isn't down where you have these issues discussed. So the reality is there are a lot of folks, particularly the ones who are not first generation revolutionaries, not in their 70s, but maybe in their 50s and younger, who are looking for their own future, their own survival, and looking for a way out. Again, these people have seen what places like Iraq after US invasion or Syria elsewhere, what happens to members of a regime that don't read the writing on the wall. They're trying to read the writing on the wall. But we haven't really given, we meaning the West, the opposition, Iranian opposition outside, or the whatever opposition inside, to the extent that they are able to articulate a future that's different, haven't done that. So, I was just going to Sina's point. I agree with many of the things that Sina said about Reza Pahlavi, he's got a lot of issues that he needs to deal with. But who else do we have that we can point to in terms of a name that is identified, that is recognized, someone with the potential? Now, I agree. His team, some of the things that comes out of the Reza Pahlavi operation is not helping, is actually counterproductive in many ways. But I think you said you want a transition from the top and not a revolution from the bottom. Actually, I'm not sure which one of these two sound the better for the Iranians who want, if they could switch the lights off, back on again, and go back to something very different, Islamic Republic. If he can be a transition leader, not go in and be like his father in 1979, be a transition leader, which by the way, as you know, Sina, was his, in terms of his messaging, that was what he was selling his out. He wasn't saying, I'm going to be the future absolute king of Iran. He was saying, I can help bring the transition, gozar in Persian, to something different, right? If he can do that, then I don't think we should be so easy to discredit him because what some of his followers are doing in social media and doing name callings and so forth. And that takes me back to your question, Mark. If you have someone like him being taken seriously, and Reza Pahlavi is not being taken seriously, in my estimation, is being used more as a leverage point against the Islamic Republic. When he shows up at the Munich Security Conference, isn't because somebody has a grand plan to actually parachute him into Iran. They're using him to scare the mullahs, Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran. And that's not good enough. You actually got to, if you really seriously want to show that you have an alternative opposition outside, you got to work with him or whoever wants to join him. It doesn't have to be Reza Pahlavi alone. It needs to be a coalition, Republicans, monarchists, also ethnic minorities. There needs to be a broad umbrella of groups that are organized along those lines. Again, not that dissimilar to what Khomeini did in 79. Then, to your point, if people want to read the writing on the wall, you're inside the regime. You don't have blood on your hands. You think you might be able to survive it. This is the moment to start rethinking your future. And you don't have to just be a member of the Pezeshkian administration or member of the IRGC. It could be across the board. I think a lot of people are in this regime not because they any longer believe in the ideology, but because that's where the paycheck comes from, or they don't have another way out. They are not able to do what the Shah and his supporters do, wire money out of the country and fly to California. They're going to either fight here or die here in Iran, meaning. And that's the thing we have to take into account. So how many of these people actually want to die for the ideology? I say the number must be very small. Anyway.
Can I add one thing to what, and I agree with everything he said. The issue, I don't even know if it's an issue. Artesh, the conventional military, has always been an apolitical organization. During the Shah, they were not even allowed to vote in the elections. It was designed to stay out of politics. Now, Artesh has a lot of problems with IRGC. They look at IRGC as a second wife that is getting all the benefits, all the perks, and they're not getting anything. And frankly, they look down on them. Artesh is still a professionally trained military force, the officer corps especially, and they look down on as IRGC as an unprofessional army, guerrilla force that doesn't understand military that much. Now, I've always thought that if IRGC really comes to the streets and starts killing much larger scale, yes, Artesh potentially could intervene. The problem, though, that I think the Islamic Republic has envisioned this scenario. All the big military bases, the large divisions, armored divisions, everything are stationed outside of the large cities. I'll give you one example. Tehran and Shiraz, two big cities, they do have military bases, but they're either boot camps, or in the case of Tehran, they have a special forces unit, or in the case of Shiraz, they have an airborne brigade. So I think it would be the bar for the Artesh or the conventional military to intervene is very high.
Laura?
Thank you both. A quick comment would be, you have a Trump administration where there's like 5 people doing Gaza, Iran, Russia, Ukraine, really like 5 people. They don't really have a policy process, even on their core national security goals. A lot of the times it's a very small group. And it doesn't seem like they have the personnel working on any of the things you're talking about getting a coalition together from the opposition, or it doesn't. And the people Trump listens to seem to be the Gulf leaders and Erdogan and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And so, what do you think the people he listens to at that level are telling him about regime change versus trying to get a deal? My question would be also, do you think there would be a prospect of trying to get a sequential set of arrangements or mini deals if they can't do the whole thing at once?
I mean, very quickly, and I like to hear what Sina says on the this is what the Turkish foreign minister has been saying for some time. Others have this phased approach to negotiations. Let's deal with the nuclear issue and move on. And really, that needs to be the big difference between 2015, because Iran refused to talk about the region because they had the upper hand. Things were working for them. Iran has good reasons to think about it differently this time around. The region, as I said, is a burden on Iran. It's not ideologically, it's kind of a bankrupt mission, and it's hated by the Iranian people who feel that the regime is intervening in the Arab world at the expense of Iranian interest. And by the way, a lot of Arab populations are also upset about the way Iran interacts with them. They want to deal with Iran. That's a normal country that trades with them, is not sanctioned, isn't a burden. And that, I think, is why I say Iran today is in a very different place in 2015. So you could see that situation, Laura, when you have a phased approach to this. Again, this is a very proud nation. I was a nation, the proud regime, and is reflected, embodied in Ali Khamenei himself. So again, President Trump wants a phone call from Khamenei saying, "Hey, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Can we do this again?" That call is never going to happen. Khamenei would rather die than make that sort of a call. So optics for the United States, you need to sort of lower the expectations in terms of what the man is willing to do publicly. As I said earlier, he's already agreed to negotiate with the United States with Trump in the White House. He said openly in a speech, we will never do that. And yet he is doing it. So he is cornered, if you will. And then that approach of a phased kind of dialogue can be fruitful, but I have to put this one caveat in there. You need a fundamental rethink on the question of the United States and by definition Israel, if you're an Islamic Republic. So openly or some other way, you have to convey to Washington that we see the need for us to change course on our position in the United States in the Middle East. We accept it. For 47 years, the policy has been the United States has to leave the region. Whether it was rhetoric or not, that was a position. That needs to soften. And something very similar needs to be said in terms of Israel's right to exist. And if you can do that, then that dialogue that you're describing could be open-ended. Because let me just give you one example that, worth considering. Let's say there's a nuclear agreement tomorrow. Does anybody really think that United States is going to sit back and let Europeans, Chinese, others go in and make money in Iran and US like in 2015 just watches? That's not going to happen. So if you want United States to make money in that Iranian market, which could be pretty lucrative, you need to also create the conditions for US companies to go in, which means you need to go far beyond just a nuclear deal. You need to make it easy for American business executives to actually think this is worth me spending a couple of $1 billion or more, but I now have political trust and this country is not going to go back overnight to something worse. So I could see that phased approach to negotiations that is much more comprehensive than nuclear issue. But I think that in many ways, the ball is in Iran's court on this issue because they need to fundamentally drop the anti-Americanism. They need to do so more in action than words, but eventually they need to also, when the day comes with post Ali Khamenei, they actually need to come out and basically say so. That they
Do you think they could do that, though?
not while Ali Khamenei is alive, but a lot of other folks in that regime understand that the anti-Americanism has not been worth it. It's cost them so much. They are now behind everybody else in the neighborhood in generational terms. Other than the missiles, what can we point to that they have? They've created an 8 million Iranian diaspora. That's their achievement, right? And that's not because that's a good thing. That's a bad thing. So the regime knows that. Ali Khamenei is an extremely stubborn man. And I always point out, during the Iran-Iraq war, 2 years into that war, Iran had kicked the Iraqis out. Iran could have had that ceasefire. And yet this stubborn regime under Khomeini at the time spent another 6 years and another 200,000 dead Iranians just get to that conclusion of sitting down and signing that deal with Saddam Hussein. We've seen something similar with this nuclear issue. We're 23 years into this. We're many trillions of damages into the Iranian economy into this. And again, they don't have a capacity to enrich right now. They know that if they want to restart it tomorrow, it gets bombed again. This is a great moment if you could convince them to actually change course and turn the chapter.
The only thing I would add is we have to go to Donald Trump's personality. The reason that Obama was successful in getting a deal with the Iranians is that he was willing to treat Iranians as equals. But Donald Trump, because of his attitude, his background, whatever he has to be frank with you, he has a condescending attitude. The people around him have a condescending attitude. And as Alex pointed out, Khamenei and the regime, they're proud people. They don't want to feel, they don't want to go to the negotiation table feeling, they're cornered or they're weak. So all they say is, we're not going to negotiate. We're not going to negotiate. And at this point that they are, I don't think that they're willing to give concessions because of the optics of giving up at the time that they were weak. Yes, perhaps at the time when they had the upper hand or they were better positioned, they would be willing to give more concessions rather than right now. I absolutely agree with Alex. Unless American companies can invest in Iran, no deal with the United States will be stable. Any president, next time, I don't know, a Democratic president or J.D. Vance, if he runs and becomes president, he says, hey, I don't like the deal that Donald Trump signed. I'm going to withdraw from it again. And who's there to stop him? So, which that requires sanctions relief. Primary sanctions need to be lifted. For that, you need a lot of issues. Regional activities, the missile program, which I don't think Iranians will ever give up on the missile program. It just doesn't make sense. No sane country would give up what they perceive to be the backbone of their defense. It's like us giving up unilaterally, dismantling our nuclear arsenal and say, hey, we don't want them anymore. Fine, we'll just give it up. I just don't think that this is how it's going to work. And again, I agree with Alex. I think that as long as Khamenei is alive, the issue of enrichment will be still there. He had actually told an Iranian negotiator that he can only give up on enrichment under two conditions. One, I resign. Two, I die. So I don't think it's going to happen.
So you think that's hard and that would exclude the consortium idea?
Look, I am personally against the idea of a consortium because of a historical background. There was, in 1975 and 1976, there was a discussion of a consortium facility for the plutonium reprocessing in Iran. Again, we're back to 1970s when Iranians and Americans are fighting over the nuclear rights, what Iran thinks they're nuclear rights. The Americans were saying the fuel of your reactors, we need to have a veto right on what you do with them. And Iranians were saying this is a violation of our national sovereignty. You can't tell us what to do. And this is Shah, by the way. And so one of the ideas that Kissinger offered to Iranians was the concession. And then the Shah and Etemad, his nuclear chief, turned and they asked Kissinger if he thinks that Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan can all work together in one facility. One specific issue with the consortium is if it is hosted in any country, let's say it's hosted in Iran, what if Iranians or Saudis, for example, if it's hosted in Saudi Arabia, what if they kick out everybody and now they have a facility to their own? Nobody can touch it. And this is why eventually Kissinger himself called it a fraud, this concession facilities. But as someone who has favored diplomacy, if it's something that everybody is open to, yeah, why not? Iranians get to save their faces. They don't have to give up on enrichment. U.S. gets to make sure that Iran cannot unilaterally act. And I think it would satisfy the Saudis who are also looking for nuclear fuel.
But do you think it would satisfy Iran under any circumstances?
I think that a concession facility, again, I don't speak personally, I speak just as an analyst. I think that it would satisfy Iranians, yes, because they get to keep the face, they save the face, they didn't give up on enrichment, they can claim and sell it domestically that we preserved our rights under the NPT. That's what they can claim.
That seems to me to be kind of as far as the Trump people could theoretically go. That's probably where the Venn diagrams overlap if they do.
I think so, but if you want to look at it from a non-proliferation perspective, I saw a report that there was a enrichment up to 1 point something percent, which is really a symbolic enrichment capacity. It's nothing really.
It's not reactor fuel.
It's not even reactor fuel. But Iranians get to maintain enrichment and tell domestically that we resisted resistance and we got the enrichment from the Americans finally.
Other questions? Over there?
You.
Yeah. So I had a question regarding the regime of the Ayatollahs and whether you feel like it's going to go down anytime soon, because I'm going to put three things in front of you and I want you guys to talk about them. The first one is the national consciousness of the Iranian people. Reza Pahlavi is not very popular within the confines of Iran. People believe he's a Western implant of sorts, and the people there in their consciousness, Operation Midnight Hammer, Rising Lion is still very fresh. It was just 7 months ago. So there's an anti-West sentiment there, which I feel like is actually fueling support for the Ayatollahs. We know that there were protests against Ayatollahs, and there were also protests which were in favor. That's the first thing I want you guys to talk about. The second thing is the concept of saving democracy in Iran and national consciousness. We know that people have still not forgot about Mossadegh, for example, and what happened to him at the hands of the Americans. The third thing is about the region. I'm from SAIS. My name is Wasi, but I'm ex-Al Jazeera, so I still have contacts in Doha. They're telling me the entire GCC is on one page with this. They don't want the regime to fall, and Saudi Arabia is spearheading this operation to make sure that that doesn't happen. The last thing is Donald Trump and his sort of vision. I've been told that he wants a swift victory. He doesn't want something that can make him stuck. And if the Ayatollahs fall, it doesn't seem like a swift victory at all because the national consciousness, you guys know, he's the Wilayat Faqih as well. He's the spiritual leader in Iran and it's majority Shia. So the support for that ideology will always be there. You guys think?
So on regional countries, I start with regional countries and please remind me of the other questions quickly. I don't think that regional countries would like to see the fall of the Islamic Republic. They would prefer to see a weakened and desperate Islamic Republic that is still there, but is weakened for a number of reasons. One, revolutions bring instability to the system. Every time there's a revolution, the likelihood of war goes up. French Revolution, the Iran Revolution, that everybody, actually Saudis were very excited that the Shah is gone. They welcomed the new regime. They said, we're so happy that your constitution is based on the Islamic Sharia. But then we saw happen a few months after the revolution, they started chanting against the Saudis. So, and secondly, I think that the regional countries would see a Western-oriented Iran as a threat to their own interest. If Iran normalizes with the United States, if it normalizes with Israel, which I think the next regime will quickly do just to spite this regime, what do you have? You have a Shia Persian state that has good relations with Israel, has good relations with the United States, has a lot of natural resources, can buy conventional weapons at ease, no problem. And by the way, it has the technology, capacity, and the know-how of producing nuclear weapons. So if I'm sitting in Riyadh, I would actually prefer to see an Islamic Republic that is weakened, its economy in shackles, and cannot move around freely. So that's with regional countries. If I'm sitting in Riyadh, that's what I'd like to see. And on democracy and Reza Pahlavi, what was the question on Reza Pahlavi exactly? Sorry.
Doesn't have popular support. He's considered as somebody who's been implanted.
I think that quickly, I think right after the June conflict, there was a short moment of people at least in their desperation, had to rally around the flag. Because as much as they despised the regime, it was the same regime that had to defend them. It's just that the natural process. But the regime's strategy was to lift social restrictions and tighten the political arena, if you will. But then when this happened, I think the attitude of, I'd say, 80%, Alex likes to think 85, 90%. I'd say 80%, 85% of the people has fundamentally changed. They're just beyond the reform. They think this is it. Regime has to go at all costs. This is why some of them are actually in favor of an intervention. It's a minority, but they think we can't get rid of this regime. So why not somebody else comes in with superior firepower and takes care of the issue, right? Now on Reza Pahlavi, again, I do want to point out that I speak as someone who supported him in 2010s. I've met with him many times, but I think that he has lost what the Persians call far shahi, the scepter of kingship. A king in Iranian history has to be able to protect the guarded domains, mamalik mahruse. And also the constitution that gives him the legitimacy to be the king or the crown prince mandates him to be the guardian and the promoter of the Shia sect of Islam. And he and his supporters are actually doing the opposite. Not only he has failed to stand up for Iran's territorial integrity, but I think in terms of his religious duty as the crown prince, he has failed. I'm not a religious person, but if I want to go by the text of the 1906 Constitution, he has failed on every agenda. Now, again, some media are trying to portray, him as this, democratic leader. Everything was perfect under the Shah, which wasn't, by the way. That's a separate issue. But I think that history teaches us otherwise.
I'll be very quick. I kind of commented what I wanted to say about Reza Pahlavi, but just remember 70% of Iranians, 90 whatever million, were born after 1979. And he is now an inspirational leader, whether we like it or not. He is inspiring that 70% demographic that is hopeless. They don't see a future for themselves. And that, again, it's not because of something amazing things he's done. It's because reflecting on the regime's attitude towards the basic needs of their own people. And again, you could take Reza Pahlavi out and put somebody else, maybe they will also get 70% were born after 1979. And Ali Khamenei has created an Iranian society where one group of Iranians are killing another group of Iranians and they don't consider each other as human beings anymore. Never mind Iranians, they don't consider each other human beings. This was not done by Reza Pahlavi. This is done by the Islamic Republic in the last 47 years. Which takes me to the whole issue of Vilayat al-Faqih and supreme leadership. There might be an opportunity to get rid of the idea of a Vilayat al-Faqih once and for all. There is no history in Iranian, customs for such a position. There's nothing in Islam that talks about Vilayat al-Faqih. This is man-made, is less than 50 years old. It can go away with Ali Khamenei and nobody's going to miss it. In fact, if I was a Shia cleric in Iran today, I'll be among those people saying we don't need Vilayat al-Faqih. What you've done to the Shia religion in Iran is a disaster. There are 50,000 empty mosques in Iran. I mean, some of these burning down of mosques, it's not because people suddenly wake up and hate Islam. It's because what has been done in the name of Islam to that population for so long. And if I'm a cleric, I'll be the first one to say, you ruined us. You ruined our image. And by the way, I will say any cleric in the region, or even Christians, it doesn't have to be limited to Muslims, need to speak up and say, the fusion of politics and religion here is an example of what not to do. But I'll say last thing about GCC. Look, I get it, and I just want to comment to what Sina said. This notion that a weak Iran, weak enough that it can challenge them, but not collapse, that it becomes a source of refugees and crisis into the rest of the region, or Iranian, God forbid, ballistic missiles or cruise missiles hitting energy infrastructure across the Persian Gulf region. I get that, and that's to some extent maybe true, but I actually don't think the GCC states are thinking in those terms anymore. I think there is a post-Arab Spring moment where the region looks at everybody needs to work together to integrate to the extent possible to lift the boat for everyone, including Iran. That's what I think the region's going on. And I know sometimes we have these spats like the Saudi Emirati one right now. We get distracted. Oh, these countries are all in zero-sum game. They can't stand their cousins to better themselves. I actually don't think that's the majority view. I think the region as a whole learned from the Arab Spring. We've got to work together, all of us. Look at some of these initiatives, the integration economic initiatives. They need not just one country, multiple countries to be involved. And by the way, that's the best way to secure foreign direct investment. You can't be safe Saudi Arabia, safe UAE, where you got a reckless neighbor next door, not Western investors anyway. So I think what they want to see the GCC states, they don't trust the United States. They don't think U.S. has an Iran policy. They fear U.S. is going to do what it did in Iraq 2003, break it and forget about it and move on. They can't live with that. If the U.S. convinced them that actually there is a strategy, I think you'll hear different voices from the Gulf states. They haven't heard that. And in the meantime, they look forward to in Iran that they can look at as a bridge between South Asia and Europe. It's their neighbor. It's part of their civilization. It's not going to go anywhere. And I just think it's really important that they're not sitting there cheering for Iranians being miserable. They're cheering for the day they can trade with Iran in a way that serves everyone. Anyway.
So one follow-up question to that, just on Saudi-Iran normalization 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
Most of the Gulf Arabs I've talked to about this have seen it positively in that it was based on respect for sovereignty. Both stopped doing things that were irritants in the relationship. From the Iranian perspective, how has that worked for them?
Look, the Iranians probably were expecting huge amounts of Saudi investment coming in. That hasn't happened. But the fact that they're not fighting the Saudis, even in words, that's good enough. This is a regime that wants to get rid of the image of the bad actor. And at the very least, they're using the optics to sort of show that Iran is not this bad actor. But I think in material terms, what we're seeing right now is the Gulf countries are all playing a role, picking up the phone, calling President Trump saying, listen, you should reconsider attacking Iran because, and the Iranians are serious. They're saying, if we're going to go, we're going to bring as many with us as we can. So we're going to really, if we feel we're going to go, we're going to damage. We're going to do what Saddam did in Kuwait when he was pulling out of Kuwait in 1991. That's what they're trying to say. And to some extent, I think maybe that strategy is working because what my impression is a lot of the Gulf leaders are saying, President Trump, please, you might be 7,000 miles away. We're right here. Do think twice before you attack Iran because we might be frontline.
Yeah, just one thing on, just to confirm what Alex said. In 1990s, Emiratis were warning the Americans that if you corner Iranians, if you push Iranians to the corner, they're going to, and his words, not mine, they're going to start acting crazy. So they're concerned. They think that they cannot go anywhere. Iran is not going to go anywhere. And the Americans are 2 oceans away. They're not going to get hurt. We're going to get hurt. So that's why I think they're, and one thing on Velayat al-Faqih, on a light mode, Ahmad Kasavi, an Iranian author, said it decades ago that we Iranians owed it to the clergy that for one time we give them the government and everything. Once the mullahs are gone, they're going to go back to the seminaries forever and they will never come back to the government. So, yeah.
I think we had a question there.
Bearing in mind both Trump's need to declare win and whatever the needs are of those in the Iranian regime who are considering their future, is there any realistic scenario that resembles the Venezuela formula, decapitation at the top, which would mean the departure of Khamenei and the abolition of his position, but not followed by anything else that we could really call regime change, and instead the Trump administration deals with whoever's left, talking about things like those business opportunities for the United States?
Look, I think, boy, I don't know. I mean, I don't see any signs of that kind of a penetration at that level that shows itself to me as an open source analyst that where are they getting the cues from? We do know that the regime is infiltrated when it comes to targeting places for the campaigns that during the 12-day war. Does that mean the same intelligence services have actually also have the inroads with political class, the elite? To your point about, is there a Venezuela? If I understood the question correctly.
Well, I wasn't keying it to the necessary, intelligence-based, exactly what was done to Maduro, but just anything that involves the departure of the supreme leader, but without.
So let me maybe answer the question this way by pointing to exactly what's going on in Iran. There is a drive right now open letters that people are issuing, statements that are coming out, people saying to Khamenei, please step down. Or if you don't step down, park yourself out. And you're in hiding in the first place right now anyway. And let others to come in with new ideas. Again, I don't know how realistic that is. I have no faith, hope in someone like Masoud Pezeshkian, the hopeless president of the Islamic Republic. But, on paper, you could say they can create a defense council, as they did right after the 12-day war. Why can't they create some kind of emergency political council that comes up with solutions? And maybe they are. Maybe Ali Larijani is part of that kind of a start of a new thinking. But the regime is in a bad place. They're stuck. They need to get out of this situation. And Ali Khamenei is not irrelevant, but his relevance going forward, depending on what others in the regime who want to survive, could become less and less going forward. I don't know if, Sina, you agree with that, or
Yes, or an Egyptian model or a Pakistani model with senior or at least former senior military commanders. I've always thought about Vladimir Ghalibaf, as I like to call him, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who's now the Speaker of the Parliament. He likes to be the strong man. He has those tendencies. Whether he will have that opportunity, I don't know. So that's the other direction. It is very possible that at some point, as Alex pointed out, people just say enough with Khamenei. He's old. He cannot perform his duties anymore. And I've noticed that, look, for someone at his age, I think good for him. I wish I was like that when I turn 86, but he's getting slow. We can't change that. Now, someone may just think that enough is enough. We need to change this. They take care of him. They push him to the side. They marginalize him. There's when I use the word coup, I don't mean that tanks and APCs will be rolling on the streets of Tehran, but a kind of a hostile takeover of the country, pushing him aside and putting one strong man at the top. That's what I think. That's one way Iran could go. But as any question regarding Iran, it's very complicated, and I think it could go anyway.
I was just reminded when Khomeini was alive, literally there was maybe 50 people working at the office of the Supreme Leader. Today you're talking thousands, 4,000 or 5,000 working the Supreme Leader's office.
Yeah.
So there are days where you could get the letter to Khomeini through his son, Ahmad Khomeini or Rafsanjani. You couldn't even mess around with the message because the old man wasn't really reading anything. You could pretend that he was speaking, but you can't do that today because what Khamenei did when he became Supreme Leader back in 1989, he spread out so much of the power. So this sort of scenario where you go in and sort of marginalize him can happen, but you actually need a good bulk of at least the inner circle, including commanders in the IRGC, to accept, listen, for the sake of surviving this, for not getting killed by our own people or the Israelis, the Americans, maybe we need to take some steps that are bold, drink the poison like Khomeini did back in 1988, and just get on with it, because there's a very proud regime we're talking about, very stubborn. They get to that point, it takes them forever, but there's also this element of maslahat, expediency. The regime needs to survive, and when they're facing sort of hard truths, sometimes you might be surprised in terms of actions of the inner core of the regime, in terms of maybe looking for ways to marginalize Khamenei and save the rest of the regime if they can. I'm not sure if they can, but it's worth giving it a shot.
To add to what Alex said, look, I really like to enjoy historical references. I think that from Khomeini, as a source of emulation, the Marja, whose office was really a very rather humble and small office, to Khamenei, who has created a Persian court for himself. It's a palace with thousands of bureaucrats, advisors, chief of staff who takes care of the logistics, to people who deliver messages to Larijani and everybody else. So I think there's a fundamental change in that regard too.
He's an absolute king.
He is a king. I call him Sayyid Ali Shah.
Yeah, he's got a turban on. He's a Persian king.
The greater question in the back. Yeah.
I'd like to follow up on the the decapitation idea, but formulated a little bit differently. the scenario would not be like Venezuela. The scenario would be like Fordo. So the idea would be you go in with a very lethal strike on specific targets that are politically definable. IRGC, not Army, IRGC. The palace, you might be able to kill Khamenei, you might not, but it doesn't matter. If you blow up his palace, that sends a message. What, by the way, you do this and you do nothing else. This is sort of like Fordo. You go in, you hit what you want to hit, and then you draw back and say, okay, let's wait around and see what happens. But the point is, the message would be delivered. Khamenei is within our target sites. The IRGC are the bad people, and we did our best to take care of them. That's what we want to do. We leave it to you. Why isn't that a much more positive idea than the notion that Trump might want to do a transaction with Khamenei? That's almost unimaginable. Who would come up with that idea? So that's my thought.
Well, on decapitation, look, it worked against Hezbollah and Hamas because they're non-state actors. They don't have a constitution. You're talking about a regime that was born out into a revolution. It was hardened, I call it, in the fires of the Iran-Iraq war. Khamenei survived assassinations. Many of the top political military officials survived assassinations. So even if you target Khamenei and his entire palace, there is a procedure in place. You have the council of experts that are there. Their job is to appoint the next leader. If you want to target them, then there's going to be elections for the next council of experts, and the regime is going to survive. The Israelis tried. They were successful in targeting IRGC commanders. They tried to target the Supreme National Security Council meeting. But even in the very low likelihood that you target all of them, they're all going to be replaced. That's one issue. And the second issue, perhaps I'm a little bit of stickler when it comes to international law. Think of the precedent that you're leaving on the international stage. Would we like the Russians to, for example, assassinate the Prime Minister of England and say, well, we thought that he is a bad actor and we think he should be removed from the play? Yes, you can do it. It works in the short term, but in the long term, I don't think it sets a good precedent, especially for the United States that claims to be the leader of the rules-based international order. That's my humble opinion.
Very quick reaction to what you just said. No, I agree. During the 12-day war, pretty much within hours, anybody who was killed, and 38, 39 senior members of IRGC were killed, they were replaced. That's true. But in terms of your question, you take out Khamenei, the scenario that Sina was talking about could happen. If everything else stands, yes, there's a procedure. They'll quickly elect another supreme leader if that's what they want to do. It could be that they get rid of supreme leadership and create something entirely different, because the regime is pretty flexible. But the one quick point I'll make is, imagine if you had the decapitation in tandem with that. Before you decapitate, you already spoken to folks. You already work part of the regime that are willing to change course, which we talked about. Again, I don't know if this is the Venezuela model, but this is an intelligence operation of sorts. But we know that there are people who are giving up, members of the regime. They did that during the 12-day war. I mean, a lot of these people who were killed, their location was revealed at the highest level. The regime is penetrated. So you can do that on military purposes. Why can't you have a political mission in mind with a decapitation? You think the man is the one obstacle and he goes away, suddenly opportunities show up? Well, you can do that, but before you decapitate, I hope I don't get into trouble sitting here. It sounds like I'm advocating for but the point is, you've got to have that conversation, because I genuinely believe a lot of these people want to live. They want to get off this boat before it sinks. If you have that conversation, there are folks that you can tolerate to deal with, kind of like Venezuela model or something like that, as opposed to entirely, replacing one regime with something very different. whether that's realistic or not, then that in that context, decapitation makes a lot more sense than just making a symbolic gesture of killing him for the sake of killing him. Because everyone knows the United States can hurt you from the other side of the world. That doesn't need to be proven. But the point is, what is the bigger mission that decapitation is part of? And
And I agree. I would only add that if the U.S. is pursuing that, you need to offer incentives to people who might be able to
they get to
take
live.
over. Well, they get to live, and they don't want to be prosecuted.
Well, it depends how much blood they get. That's where they're talking about, international law and where the U.S. stands on it. Yeah.
Response to this gentleman's comment about, oh, well, the regime will just fix itself. That might have made sense before the 7,000 murders or the 10,000 murders. That's the reality now. You've got a country that has just experienced this shocking massacre of their own people. That makes it different as far as I'm concerned.
What do we do if Iran shoots back after we decapitate and they start blowing up our bases in the region? Is it going to look like a good idea then?
Well, my question would be, is the IRGC going to be shooting those missiles, or is it the Army? If we've gone after the IRGC and left the Army and said, okay, do what you want to do now, I wonder whether there would be missiles, but I don't know. I'm not an expert on that.
Well,
I see it very unlikely that the army, the Artesh, would intervene in political affairs because they've been trained to stay out of politics. That's just the culture of the organization and the institution, excuse me. Again, under the Shah, they were not even allowed to vote. Some of the restrictions have been lifted now. They can't vote, but they can't be a member of any political organization. Just the culture that keep the conventional armed forces out of politics. Now, as I said, again, for their own purposes, they might try to go after IRGC. But I think, as I pointed out, I think the bar for the army to intervene is set very high.
A couple of times it was hinted at that, they do want a deal to happen. They're not going to concede on missiles or sponsoring terror proxies. I'm wondering, Alex, you mentioned that they know it has to be something that Trump can hold up and say, look, I won. What chips do they have that they would concede on to get that? And Tina, I'd love your opinion on this. Yeah.
Like, what could be given to Trump to get a deal if it's not going to be missiles or terror proxies?
Very quickly, something that you can lift up and say, I won. Trump really, to me, has to be, it's nuclear related. I mean, it has to be on the nuke. I don't think on the missiles, they're going to come in and announce anything big. Under proxies, I have a tough time this regime coming out and saying, we roll back the proxy model, the acts of resistance is dead, we accept it. They're not going to do that again. But what you want to do, if you really care less about the optics, more about something that's measurable in terms of change of behavior, is you get US intelligence to tell you, yeah, actually, the flow of money, arms, and so on has dropped. Whatever is left of that to Hezbollah, to Houthis. And I'm not even sure how much they got to spare these days too. Because, there was a time where Iran would use the proxies to hit someone, but because you could claim, that this was not your action. Deniability was of value at some point. Today, Iran is in a different place. They fire off, and they take credit for it because they're so weak. They're so, in a position where they want to show that they're not out. So I would say, to answer your question, something that looks like a win for Trump would be nuclear related, something that could be done in practical terms, change of policy, but isn't necessarily TV material, but it's something that can be measured in the region. Is going to be on the proxy side. And the missiles, really, we were talking again, Greg, about this. The missiles were like, Iran could come out and say, I keep my missiles, but no first use on my part, right? So they don't go and become entirely humiliated. And yet, unless Israel attacks them, they agree not to, whatever that's worth in terms of arms treaties that go.
I finally found a line that I can disagree with, Alex. I think with non-state actors, I don't like to use the word proxy because when you use proxy, you're taking the agency out of these groups. So I usually use the word non-state allies. I think it is possible to get a deal As Iranians had offered it in 2003, in May of 2003, Iranians had offered to help Hezbollah transform into a political organization. Back then, George W. Bush administration ignored it. But I think a deal like that would be possible. I think Iran is rather bandwagoning on the Houthi cause. They don't see any necessity to keep Houthis. They can just leave them alone. Hezbollah is really the queen of all these non-state allies in the chess game. So that could be on the table. Iranians could help with Hezbollah being transformed into a political organization. And on a very quick side note, the origins of Hezbollah goes back to the Shah when he spent $5 million in Lebanon to create a Shia group that protects Iranian interests. That's with the non-state actors. Now, on missiles, absolutely no first use, I agree. Or the other option is that I don't think Iranians would agree to limit the range or reduce the range of their missiles. But you could say that since you have openly and publicly said that I choose or I opt to maintain or cap the range at 2,000 kilometers, what about codifying it into an agreement plus the no first use? But the question is, what is Donald Trump is willing to give in return? My perspective is that Tehran's thinking, we may disagree here in Washington, but from Tehran's perspective, those missiles are the only pillar of the so-called forward defense that work quite effectively.
Yeah.
That's their perspective. Now, whether we agree with it or not, that's a separate issue. But if they think that the missiles work effectively, they're not going to give up on it.
Mhm.
Now, again, codifying it into an agreement, 2,000 kilometers, that could work. That's what I think. On the nuclear issue, I already said it. I think a concession facility minimizing the enrichment cap, that also could be on the table. But again, the question is, what is the U.S. willing to give on the missile program? I just a thought. I don't say that the U.S. has to or should do it, but a concession would be, okay, if Iran wants to buy conventional weapons, we're not going to interfere with Russia and China selling tanks, air defenses to Iranians. That's something that could be discussed. I don't know. But from my perspective, any agreement usually involves mutual concessions.
No, I just want to go back to something Laura said earlier about there are 5 guys working on 3 different files: Ukraine, Gaza, and Iran. And then this kind of, in a way, it's a timing wise, it sucks that you don't have that kind of intellectual power to go and think of ways to give this Iranian regime ways to save itself, if that's what the US decides to do. I mean, you could try and topple it. That's one way. You could say, look, for your own sake, we want a nuclear deal, but let's see if we can expand that, save yourself. What do I mean by save yourself? Look, where are the efforts right now in the region to, for example, force Iran to consider its support for the Palestinian cause different? There are ways you can approach Iran's position on Palestine that essentially get Iran to recognize Israel without saying so.
Sure.
The Arab countries, the Muslim countries right now, the 8,000 Indonesians who are going to go out and be peacekeepers, I mean, there is a place for them to get involved and say to Iran, listen, what you're doing, it didn't work. You tried it since 1979. It didn't work. You brought war to your own country. And now maybe you should change course. Again, I could see this Iranian regime looking for a way to say, we change course not because of American pressure, but because of Muslim solidarity. And the U.S. needs to be a leader in that effort. Again, it goes back to the capacity U.S. to have to do that thing. But look, quickest way to fix things is to agree to open up that U.S. embassy in some ways.
I'm all for it.
But this is a regime that's turned out into a core pillar of, if the U.S. embassy opens, that's the end of the Islamic Republic. And that's the tragedy.
Khamenei himself.
Yeah, Khamenei has said it so many times.
On what Alex said on the Palestinian issue, just a reminder that in the past couple of years, Iranians have twice voted in favor of a 2-state solution at the UN General Assembly. So that's something that we could
so proud. You could come out and say it in very bold, simple terms. In terms of, recognize Palestinian state next to Israel state, with our fellow whatever Middle Eastern countries, Muslim, but they don't do it because they're so proud, and the country pays the price for it, basically.
And the people.
Just a very quick follow-up. I'm assuming that they would not go below 2,000 kilometers.
No, I mean,
No,
no,
because that would exclude Israel. But
that would exclude
that's
Israel.
probably exactly what the U.S. That's where the Venn diagram is no.
Iran has always, since the time of the Shah, has perceived the biggest threat to be coming from the West. Iraq, back then Syria, now under the Islamic Republic. I think Iraq, at least prior to 2003, still Iraq, but now Israel is the biggest perceived threat to Iranians. Yeah, and nothing from the East.
Yeah, which from the U.S. probably makes that a non-starter.
What is it?
The U.S. would probably see that as a non-starter.
Capping or
a 2,000 kilometer limit, because it includes Israel within the range.
I don't know.
I think they're trying to maintain Israel's freedom of action.
Look, I think if it's with it's with the U.S. I mean, they would say 500 kilometers or 300 kilometers. Yeah. But again, I don't think Iranians would agree to it.
If you don't write in Hebrew "death to Israel," those missiles, maybe the range will become a different matter. I mean, it's so much of this is the politics that goes with the Islamic Republic. This is a regime that really engages in so much sloganeering that I don't think any other country in the history of man has engaged in so much empty sloganeering at such a high cost for so long, including what they say about Israel and the United States.
We have about 8 minutes left. We got time for another, maybe 2 questions. Then I think we'll wrap it up.
We'll wrap it up.
It's been a great discussion. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, great.
Okay, thank you.
Good to see you.